Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening, as the world outside begins to hush its busy clamor and prepare for the long, velvet embrace of darkness? I invite you now to leave the clamor of your own time and step gently across the sands of countless millennia, traveling back to the land the ancients called Kemet, the Black Land, where the great river flows under the watchful gaze of the gods. We shall journey tonight upon the face of the mighty Hapi, the Nile, when the stars of the northern sky begin their majestic, slow wheel above the deserts, and silence reigns supreme over the mud-brick villages nestled amongst the fruitful fields. The last sliver of the sun god Aten had long since been swallowed by the western horizon, leaving behind only streaks of deep violet and fiery saffron that quickly bled into the impenetrable indigo of the desert sky. A cool, heavy air, scented with the fertile dampness of the river mud and the delicate perfume of late-blooming lotus, settled over the landscape, urging the noisy inhabitants of the day into a deep slumber. The great river, which, during the brightness, had been a shimmering ribbon of blinding silver, now appeared as a pathway of polished obsidian, reflecting the newly appearing constellation of the Hippo, the divine Taweret, who guards the northern pole. Our vessel is but a simple reed craft, sturdy and deep-bellied, perfectly designed to skim the dark surface without disturbing the sacred slumber of the waters. At the helm stands Kenti, a man whose skin is the color of aged ebony and whose eyes hold the quiet depth of the river itself. A silent ferryman known throughout the surrounding nomes only for his unwavering patience and his absolute mastery of the nightly current. He does not speak or sing, but the movement of his long, smooth paddle against the water is its own steady, rhythmic chant, a low, consistent thrum that is the only sound permitted to break the profound stillness between the riverbanks. Kenti's nightly passage is not dictated by the urgency of commerce or the needs of kings, but by a quiet, philosophical duty, traversing the dividing line between the populated East and the holy, silent West, the land of the ancestors and the setting sun. He guides his craft not by the aid of torches, which would profane the moon's silvery glow, but by the subtle, knowing movement of the celestial bodies mirrored perfectly in the water beneath his hands. To travel with Kenti is to submit to the ancient order of Ma'at, the divine harmony, where every action is measured and every silence is pregnant with meaning. To travel with Kenti is to submit to the ancient order of Ma'at, the divine harmony, where every action is measured and every silence is pregnant with meaning. Looking toward the southern horizon, one can dimly perceive the massive, immutable outlines of the Great Pyramids, which appear in the darkness not as structures built by human hands, but as colossal terrestrial embodiments of the primeval mound that rose from the chaotic waters of Nun at the moment of creation. These mountainous tombs, now cloaked entirely in shadows, seem to draw all the light from the air around them, standing as silent, permanent witnesses to the cyclical journey of the sun god through the underworld. Kenti feels their immense presence like a pressure in the air, a reminder that human life is but a fleeting moment stretched between two infinite horizons of eternity. Kenti feels their immense presence like a pressure in the air, a reminder that human life is but a fleeting moment stretched between two infinite horizons of eternity. As the hour deepens, the focus shifts entirely upward, away from the familiar contours of the land and toward the immense, dark belly of the sky goddess Nut, who arches over the world, swallowing the sun at dusk only to give birth to it again at dawn. The stars are the precious jewels adorning her body, each one a spark of divine fire, or perhaps the wandering soul of a blessed ancestor, tracing their own eternal path along the celestial Nile. Traveling at night upon the physical river allows one to feel profoundly connected to this celestial river above, participating in the divine voyage of Ra's sunbark as it combats the serpent of chaos, Uphep. The banks draw closer here, thick with swaying papyrus reeds that grow taller than a man, and the air momentarily fills with the rustling, whispering sounds of hidden life. Waterfowl shift nervously within their nests, and the sudden, large splash of a startled Nile perch momentarily disrupts the water's perfect reflection, before silence immediately asserts its dominion once more. These are the ephemeral voices of the marsh, sounds that Kimti understands are the living breath of the earth, holding no fear for him as he moves through them with the quiet dignity of a man who respects all that crawls, swims, or flies. We pass a small, abandoned ferry landing on the eastern bank, marked only by 3 rough mooring stones that are slowly sinking back into the soft earth, their purpose forgotten by the passing centuries. Kenty dips his paddle deeper to push away from the shallow bank, thinking of the countless generations of farmers and traders who used this very spot, their hopes, their laughter, and their sorrows all absorbed into the mud and the water, now merely silent ghosts of memory. The river is the great keeper of time, holding the history of the land within its steady, unending flow. He glances toward the distant glow that marks the great city of Waset, Thebes, where the powerful temple of Amun stands in massive, dark silhouette against the moonlit plain. The towering pylons and obelisks appear from this distance like frozen waves, monumental testaments to human devotion. But now they are humbled by the night, their overwhelming scale subdued into a series of geometric shadows. It is only when the moonlight catches the highly polished granite of a single sacred stone that the structure seems to return a brief, cold wink of acknowledgement across the expanse of water. The rhythm of the paddling begins to slow just slightly, indicating that the journey is nearing its intended destination on the west bank, the hallowed domain of Osiris, Lord of the Dead. The atmosphere perceptibly changes as the craft approaches this shore. The air feels heavier, cooler, imbued with a sacred solemnity that demands respect and absolute stillness from the traveler. Here, the river crossing is not merely a geographic movement, but a rehearsal for the final, ultimate crossing of life into the afterlife, known as the Beautiful West. Kenty's eyes, attuned to the finest details of the nocturnal world, detect the movement of a lone sentinel heron, perched atop a ruined statue head half buried in the sand just above the waterline, standing perfectly still like a guardian of the shore. The bird represents the divine Bennu, the mythical heron associated with rebirth, watching the arrival of the living in the land of the deceased. The ferryman offers a silent, respectful nod to the creature, recognizing the pervasive presence of the divine in every aspect of the ancient night. The boat finally slips silently into the receiving channel, disturbing only a small cloud of hovering insects whose wings catch the moonlight for a fleeting moment. There is no dock here, only a low, sloping bank of hard clay worn smooth by the passage of centuries of silent feet and sacred offerings. Kenty gently lodges the bow into the soft earth, the sound of the friction a dull, satisfying rasp that signals the temporary end of the riverine voyage. He rises slowly, stretching the great, strong muscles in his back, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having once again successfully navigated the challenging currents of both the physical river and the metaphysical passage of the night. He carries no goods, no passengers seeking earthly profit, but only the weighty silence and the accumulated knowledge of the stars and the currents, ready to deliver this stillness to the waiting lest. The meaning of the journey lies not in the arrival, but in the faithful execution of the middle hours, those deep, solitary moments when the human world sleeps and the divine world stirs. The path leading away from the riverbank is marked only by a line of aged sycamore trees, whose branches look like skeletal arms raised in benediction toward the moon, shielding the secrets of the chapels and tombs hidden further inland. Kenty secures his craft with a single practiced knot, understanding that the river, like time itself, will hold the boat gently until the hour of his return, when the eastern sky begins to bruise with the first promise of the reborn sun god. This waiting moment is the deepest part of the night, where silence is the only language. He begins to walk inland, his sandals kicking up tiny puffs of fine, dry desert dust that instantly settle back down, leaving no lasting trace of his passing. The coolness of the desert night is profound, carrying the scent of dry stone and infinite emptiness, a stark contrast to the humid, fertile smell of the river he has just left behind. He walks toward a small, rock-hewn chamber, a sanctuary known only to a few, where he will spend the darkest hours contemplating the mysteries that govern the eternal cycle of death and resurrection, guarded by the silent sentinels of the royal necropolis. The carved hieroglyphs surrounding the entrance to the sanctuary, illuminated by the distant, pale light of the moon, appear to shift and move, the painted figures of gods and kings seeming to lean forward from the stone to whisper their ancient wisdom to the passing night. These words, Kenty knows, are not intended for the ear of the living, but for the soul of the traveler. Reminders that the greatest treasures of Kemet are sealed not in gold, but in stone and in the eternal patterns of the cosmos. He steps inside, leaving the wide expanse of the river valley behind him for the narrow, sacred space of contemplation. Inside, the air is still and cool, heavy with the faint, lingering scent of burnt incense used by priests centuries ago, a perfume that seems to defy the erosion of time. Kenty settles himself upon a worn stone bench, closing his eyes not to rest, but to see more clearly the internal landscape of his own soul, seeking the alignment with Ma'at that his journey demands. The river journey has cleared his external vision, and now the interior journey begins, seeking the deep connection between the flowing Hapi and the unchanging, orderly flow of the cosmos itself. He listens not to the sounds outside, but to the pulse within his own chest, a steady, measured beat that reminds him that life is a sacred trust, given and taken in accordance with the divine will of the creators. The true stillness of the ancient night is found not in the lack of noise, but in the perfect equilibrium between the rising and the setting, the breathing in and the breathing out, the life of the East and the repose of the West. His contemplation is a silent offering, a prayer whispered not with the voice, but with the entire dedication of his being to the enduring truth of Kemet. Kenty ponders the vastness of the darkness, understanding that darkness is not the absence of light, but the necessary domain of becoming, the womb from which the light of dawn must constantly emerge, purified and renewed. The night is a time of labor for the gods, a period of fierce cosmic struggle and quiet, profound preparation, ensuring that the sun will conquer the chaos that seeks to engulf the ordered world. His role, the humble ferryman, is to be a stable bridge within this flux, ensuring safe passage between these two powerful states of existence. The hours slip by with the slow, inevitable grace of the desert wind shifting the dunes, marked only by the movement of the moon across the single small opening in the rock ceiling, casting a creeping square of light across the chamber floor. Kenty remains motionless, absorbing the silence of the kings and queens buried nearby, whose eternal sleep provides the fertile ground for the continued life of the land they once governed. He is one with the darkness, anchored to the unwavering pattern of the night. When the moonlight finally begins to fade and the stars above grow slightly paler, Kenty knows that the moment of transition is imminent, that the great serpent Apep has been defeated once more, and the divine bark is approaching the final gates of the dawn. He rises, his body feeling refreshed and strangely light, imbued with the deep power drawn from the quiet wisdom of the dead and the steadfast flow of the river. The internal journey is complete, and the time for the physical return is at hand, carrying the renewed silence back to the awakening east. He steps out from the chamber and is greeted by the first subtle change in the air, a minute shift in temperature that signals the breaking of the deepest chill, the promise of warmth returning to the world. The dark outlines of the sycamore trees now look less skeletal and more like steadfast guardians awaiting the glorious event of the solar reappearance. The faint sound of the wind carries the distant, almost inaudible cry of a jackal, a creature sacred to Anubis, reminding all that the boundaries between the living and the honored dead remain sharp and clear. Kenti walks back toward the river, his steps retracing the exact path, finding the reed craft exactly where he had secured it hours earlier, floating gently in the receiving channel. The water of the Nile, though still black, now possesses a softer quality, a faint opalescence that whispers of the light hidden just beneath the eastern horizon, gathering strength for its grand unveiling. He unties the single knot and swings the boat out into the main current, ready to make the return crossing. The return journey is always faster, driven not only by the current, but by the palpable energy of anticipation that builds in the air as the world prepares to greet the new day. He paddles with a renewed strength, a quiet haste that is born of necessity, knowing that the river must be crossed before the full rush of human activity begins to stir along the banks. The journey is nearly complete, bringing the solemn peace of the night back to the busy shore of the living. As the east begins to show the first delicate blush of pink, Kenti guides his craft toward the familiar eastern landing spot, the one where life, trade, and sun worship hold sway. The sounds of the day begin to assert themselves, the distant crowing of a rooster, the lowing of cattle stirring in their pens, the faint chatter of women beginning their early morning tasks around the well. The profound silence of the night is finally dissolved by the inevitable, hopeful noise of a waking world. He steps ashore and secures the boat, the sun-drenched mud feeling warm and yielding beneath his feet, a world away from the cool, rigid earth of the west. Kenti stands for a moment, his gaze fixed upon the swiftly brightening horizon, witnessing the daily miracle of Ra's triumph over chaos. He is merely the ferryman, but he is also the silent participant in the great cosmic rhythm, the bridge between darkness and light, carrying the eternal wisdom of the night into the embrace of the new day. His duty done, Kenti leaves the boat to the rising sun, turning his back on the vibrant bustle that is now rapidly consuming the riverbank, ready to fade back into the background of the awakening world, carrying only the memory of the profound silence within his heart. He knows he will be called again when the shadows lengthen and the moon begins its climb. For the journey across the ancient Egyptian night is eternal, never fully ceasing, reflecting the constant, sacred flow of existence itself. He melts away into the narrow alleyways of the town, leaving the river to the noise of the day, waiting patiently for the return of the stars. The deep, resonant peace of the desert night settles back into the memory of the land, a quiet promise that even in the brightest hours of the sun, the wisdom and the profound stillness of the dark remains, waiting to welcome the soul when the day's work is finished. This continuous cycle, this unwavering dedication to the divine rhythm, is the heart of Kemet, carried nightly upon the silent boat of the ferryman Kenti, under the gaze of the eternal, watchful stars. We too must now let that quiet rhythm carry us back to our own time, holding the peace of the Nile in our hearts. Greetings once more, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening as we resume our journey? Kenti finds solace in a cool, mud-brick structure set slightly back from the baking heat of the main thoroughfare, where the thick walls hold the blessed memory of the night's coolness and shut out the blinding glare of high noon. He stretches out upon a simple mat woven from reeds, allowing his body, weary from hours of guiding the silent vessel, to sink into a deep repose that is not merely sleep, but a profound communion with the still center of the world. Even as the marketplace outside begins to roar with the sharp sounds of commerce and argument, his spirit remains anchored in the placid depths of the Nile, where chaos has no reach and only the stars provide direction. The hours pass like slow barges laden with heavy stillness, marked only by the shifting shadows cast by the date palms in the small courtyard, their fronds barely moving in the oppressive dry air. Kenti neither watches the sun nor consults any device, for his internal clock is governed not by the needs of men, but by the rising imperative of the cosmic order, the precise moment when Duat begins its nightly reign over the western sky. He uses this quiet time to cleanse the day's dust from his senses, allowing the memories of the brief, intense encounters he had during the darkness, the whisper of the priestess, the scholar carrying heavy scrolls, the silent watcher on the bank, to settle gently within him like fine silt. This deep rest is not idleness. It is the vital preparation required for traversing the realm of shadows, ensuring his heart remains light enough to navigate the sacred waters without fear or distraction. As the sun begins its dramatic descent toward the Libyan plateau, staining the western sky with hues of apricot and deep cinnabar, a palpable sigh of relief seems to rise from the very stones of the town, welcoming the blessed coolness. The sharp edges of the day soften, and the distant, haunting calls of the evening birds begin their sacred liturgy, announcing the impending return of the travelers from the underworld to the embrace of the living world. Kentis stirs, the coolness touching his skin like a silent reminder of his awaiting vessel, feeling the familiar pull of the river calling him back to his true domain, the world unseen by the frantic gaze of the day. He rises slowly, collecting his simple things, a water skin, a small offering of bread for the long watch, and the silent, heavy paddle that has served his family for 3 generations of moonlit crossings. He steps back into the bustling twilight, navigating the slow-moving crowd of farmers returning from the fields and merchants closing their stalls, yet remaining strangely apart from their worries and their tired joys. Though he walks among them, his mind is already focused upon the dark, shimmering path of the water, a path only visible to those who possess the trust to move without earthly light or guiding star other than the ones in the celestial river above. When he reaches the mooring, he finds his small, shallow draft boat just where he left it, swaying gently in the subtle current, patiently awaiting its master's touch and the weight of its nightly burdens, both mortal and spiritual. Before he boards, Kenti pours a small libation of pure river water back into the Nile, a traditional and heartfelt gesture of thanks and request for safe passage from Hapi, the spirit of the river itself. The mooring ropes are slipped without a sound, and with a single, practiced push of the long pole against the muddy bottom, Kenti guides the vessel away from the noise and confusion of the bank and into the enveloping, profound quiet of the deep water. The town sounds instantly diminish, fading into a low, muffled hum that confirms the separation between the realm of human industry and the boundless territory of the nocturnal Nile, where silence is the only appropriate language. His eyes, now perfectly accustomed to the gathering gloom, begin to discern the subtle movements on the water, the swift dart of a fish, the slow ripple of the current against the distant papyrus reeds, the faint glimmer of the sandbanks under the emerging stars. He takes his position in the stern, the paddle resting across his knees for a moment, simply absorbing the vast, humbling presence of the river and preparing his spirit for the sacred cargo he will soon carry. He does not have to wait long, for the river holds its own schedule, and the first silhouette soon appears on the far bank, a figure shrouded in simple white linen, standing motionless against the deepening indigo of the eastern horizon. This traveler moves with the determined yet sorrowful gait of one undertaking a necessary farewell, burdened perhaps not by physical possessions, but by the weight of unspoken grief or a promise yet unfulfilled left on the shore. Kenty steers toward him steadily, not asking where he goes or why he travels in this desolate hour, for the ferryman knows that the reasons for nocturnal journeys are often matters only for the soul and the gods to determine. The man steps aboard the small craft without a word, his gaze fixed straight ahead upon the western bank, the destination of many who seek solace or silence beneath the shadow of the great desert beyond. The paddle dips into the water, not with a splash, but with a measured, deliberate sigh, pushing the boat forward in a rhythm that feels older than the pyramids themselves, a steady pulse against the heart of the night. This rhythmic motion is a profound form of meditation, anchoring Kenty's mind against the temptations of distraction and doubt, leaving him solely dedicated to the necessary discipline of the passage. The wake trails behind them like a dark serpent of disturbed water, quickly dissolving back into the placid mirror reflecting the innumerable, glittering diamonds of the heavenly sky above, which seem closer and brighter in the clean desert air than in any other place in Kemet. They cross the span of the great river under the watchful eye of Osiris, the great ruler of the dead and the cycles of rebirth, whose constellation now shines high overhead, guiding all who navigate the threshold between existence and memory. They cross the span of the great river under the watchful eye of Osiris, the great ruler of the dead and the cycles of rebirth, whose constellation now shines high overhead, guiding all who navigate the threshold between existence and memory. The passenger remains perfectly silent, his presence a heavy, contained pocket of emotion within the fragile vessel. Yet Kenty respects this profound quietude, knowing that the night journey demands introspection and holds little room for trivial conversation or passing pleasantries. The true sound of the night in Kemet is not the absence of noise, but rather the collective, gentle breathing of the ancient land itself, a steady exhalation of timeless patience and enduring knowledge that pervades the silent journey. Only the faint, almost imperceptible lapping of the water against the boat's side and the soft scrape of the paddle against the wooden hull break the immense stillness, confirming that they are moving, yet moving through a space defined by profound rest. For the ferryman, every single crossing is a renewal of his pact with the deep forces of existence, a reaffirmation that life and death, light and dark, are merely opposite banks of the same boundless river, forever connected by the moving water. As they approach the shadowy western shore, where the desert begins its long, lonely vigil, the air grows subtly colder, carrying the dryness of the sand and the hint of vast, empty spaces where only spirits dwell. Kenty slows the pace, feeling the current now pulling slightly differently as they near the bank, a sign that the land itself is ready to receive the traveler and whatever sorrow or mystery he carries. He guides the bow silently toward a small, familiar landing point, marked only by an ancient, weather-worn stone. A marker unseen by the eyes of day, but known intimately to all who traverse the deepest night. The passenger prepares to disembark, gathering his cloak tightly around him, still keeping his silence as profound as the darkness surrounding them. Kenty holds the boat steady with a skilled movement of the paddle, allowing the traveler to step onto the dark earth of the western bank without even disturbing the smallest pebble on the shore. Before he walks away into the impenetrable gloom, the traveler turns slightly, offering a single, brief nod to the ferryman, a gesture of silent gratitude that speaks volumes of the journey's necessity and its profound importance. This acknowledgement is the only wage Kenty requires, the confirmation that his silent service has honored the great balance of the world and safely delivered one more soul into the custody of the western horizon. The ferryman watches the figure melt into the shadows, a fleeting presence now absorbed back into the vast, ancient tapestry of the land's nightly repose. He does not linger, for his work is only beginning, and the current already urges him back toward the eastern shore, where others are waiting for the inevitable crossing under the gaze of the high moon. The rhythm of his return stroke is slightly different now, lighter, carrying the knowledge of a duty fulfilled and the quiet anticipation of the next encounter, the next silent story to be carried across the waters. The river, having claimed its temporary passenger, now flows with renewed serenity, reflecting the full, luminous face of the moon which has climbed high above the palm groves, bathing the whole scene in silvered, ethereal light. Kenti prepares his heart again, ready to embrace the next traveler, whether they carry laughter or grief, knowing that every single person who seeks passage at this hour is a pilgrim on the most sacred of paths. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening as the stars turn their slow wheel above the river of time? The traveler, whose form has now been swallowed entirely by the western shadow, strides across the low-lying plain that separates the fertile, breathing land from the silent domain. The shift in atmosphere is profound. The moist green air of the riverbank is instantly replaced by a brittle dryness, the lingering heat of sun-baked stone radiating upward even in the deep coolness of the night, warning him that he has left the realm of immediate sustenance and entered the kingdom of rock and spirit. He moves with a determined stride, knowing that hesitation is a luxury afforded only to those who sleep soundly on the eastern shore, relying solely on the faint, echoing sound of his own sandals crunching the sparse, wind-blown grit. His destination lies hidden amongst the hills, a solitary, rock-cut sanctuary known only to a few faithful who understand the true value of nocturnal communion with the ancestors. He relies not upon the flickering uncertainty of a lamp, for such light draws unwanted attention and disrupts the sanctity of the darkness, but upon the great cosmic lantern held aloft by the goddess Nut. The constellation of Sa, the strong hunter, rises steadily ahead of him, his belt 3 luminous jewels pointing directly toward the narrow defile he must navigate to reach his destination, serving as a reliable guide etched into the imperishable fabric of the sky. As he gains elevation, the vast silence becomes overwhelming, pressing against his ears until even the distant murmur of the great river seems to cease, leaving only the profound, resonant hum of the earth itself. He passes the first boundary markers of the necropolis, the low, weathered stelae, whose carvings are smoothed almost entirely away by the fierce breath of millennia, offering silent testimony to the layers of history built upon this sacred ground. These ancient, anonymous names serve as his escorts, the sleeping population of the West confirming his right to walk among them, provided his intent remains pure and respectful of their endless repose. A sudden, low movement catches the corner of his eye, causing him to pause instantly and draw his breath inward until his heart seems to still. A sleek, powerful form detaches itself from the shadow cast by a low, ruined wall, a desert jackal, lean and watchful, whose eyes reflect the cold silver of the high moon without flinching. This solitary creature stands not as a predator, but as a sentinel, the living embodiment of the god Anubis, who watches over the thresholds of the sleeping. The traveler remains perfectly still, meeting the creature's intense gaze with quiet reverence, acknowledging the silent authority the jackal holds in this desolate place. After a long moment, during which the traveler offers a brief, internal prayer of respect to the guardian of the threshold, the jackal gives a barely perceptible tilt of its head, satisfied by the pilgrim's humility and intent. It turns with effortless grace and melts back into the darkness, leaving the traveler to continue his path, feeling both profoundly alone and yet carefully observed by the ancient forces of the land. He finally reaches the mouth of the narrow canyon, where the air cools dramatically, shielded from the wind and the moonlight by the towering walls of ancient limestone. The destination is close now. A simple, unadorned rock face reveals the entrance to the small, hidden Chapel of Whispers, its opening little more than a dark slit in the stone. A slab of rough-hewn granite that serves as the door is propped slightly ajar, suggesting that the gods, or perhaps only the faithful who guard the location, knew of his intended arrival and had prepared the way for his solitary vigil. Stepping inside, the traveler is instantly enveloped by a profound stillness, a silence so complete that the memory of sound seems to vanish utterly. The air is dry and cool, carrying the faint, comforting scent of long-ago burnt incense mingled with the clean, mineral dust of the desert rock. He carefully slides the granite slab shut, plunging the small chamber into absolute darkness, relying on the knowledge that his purpose is illumination, not light from earthly sources, preparing himself for the internal journey that must now begin. He reaches inside his modest leather satchel and draws out a small, dried cake of resinous cedar, placing it gently into a miniature bronze brazier that rests on a low, central offering table. Striking a tiny spark with his flint and steel, he nurses the flame until the incense begins to smolder, releasing a thin, ethereal plume of fragrant smoke that catches the meager light filtering in from an almost invisible ventilation shaft high above. The smoke drifts slowly upward, twisting and obscuring the carved figures on the ceiling, signaling the start of the sacred time when the veil between the known world and the deeper truths thins. The smoke drifts slowly upward, twisting and obscuring the carved figures on the ceiling, signaling the start of the sacred time, when the veil between the known world and the deeper truths thins. He has sought this sanctuary tonight to lay down the great burden that has shadowed his days, a long-standing grievance concerning the disposition of his father's estate, a conflict that pits the harsh requirements of the law against the gentle necessity of familial peace. In the bustling marketplace, this choice felt impossible, a tangled knot of duty and desire. Here, where the concept of ma'at, order and truth, is perpetually reflected in the silent stones, he hopes to gain the perspective necessary to untangle the threads without sacrificing his soul's integrity. Settling onto the cool, smooth floor, his back resting against the enduring strength of the rock face, he closes his eyes and begins the slow, deliberate work of stilling the inner storm. He focuses entirely on the steady, rhythmic beat of his own heart, allowing the outside world, the river, the ferryman, the fields, the demanding voices, to recede into the realm of shadows and irrelevance. This deliberate slowing is the ancient discipline, the way to allow the Ba, the traveling soul, to reconnect with the enduring Ka, the life force, seeking clarity at the unmoving center of his existence. As the midnight hour passes, marked only by the shifting position of the moon's silver reflection visible through the small vent, he recalls the whispered history of this particular spot. The ancient ones taught that this hill was once an island during the earliest, highest floods, a place where primordial creation first dried and solidified. The very rock upon which he rests holds the memory of geological ages, of celestial alignments, and the slow, inexorable turning of the cycle of life and death. Against such immense, terrifying time, his personal conflict seems small, yet no less critical to the balance of his own fleeting life. The air in the chapel grows sharp and deeply cold, the chill that precedes the dawn and signals the hour when the barriers between the living and the honored dead are at their most permeable. He pulls his thin woolen shawl tight around his shoulders, a purely physical gesture, But his mind remains intensely focused, having pushed past the initial fatigue and entered a state of clear, unwavering awareness. It is in this profound stillness that the memory he sought surfaces, clear as the freshest spring water. He remembers his father, frail but firm, lying upon his deathbed, speaking of the disputed field. "The boundaries are marked by stone," the old man had whispered, his voice thin as papyrus. "But the true boundary is marked by the spirit. Do not seek victory, my son, but seek harmony, for victory is temporary, while harmony is the song of the duat." This cryptic counsel, forgotten in the ensuing grief and legal wrangling, now resonated with the strength of prophecy in the silence of the tomb. The traveler understands now that his journey was not about finding an external answer, but about rediscovering the internal wisdom already granted to him, lost amidst the noise of the world. The choice between confrontation and compromise is false. The true path lies in finding a solution that honors the stone boundaries while maintaining the spiritual accord his father valued. The incense has burned down to a fine ash, but the fire of understanding has been kindled within his chest. He rises stiffly, stretching the limbs that have been motionless for many hours, and approaches the carved wall, where the faint moonlight reveals the figure of Thoth, ibis-headed and wise, holding his writing palette. The god's silent presence seems to confirm the internal shift the traveler has experienced. The journey has been successful, the counsel received, not through magical visions, but through disciplined, reflective solitude in the face of eternity. He is ready now to return to the world of noise, carrying the stillness within him as a shield. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The traveler carefully replaces the heavy stone slab, sliding it back into the frame carved millennia ago, sealing the sanctuary against the wind and the desert's forgetfulness. He leaves the silence undisturbed, ensuring that the wisdom he gained remains guarded by the weight of time and earth, a private gift shared only with the ancestors. The air outside, though still cooled by the deep night, holds a texture entirely different from the cool, inert atmosphere within the rock, filled now with the scent of dry grasses and the faint perfume of the nearby river, signaling the living world he must soon re-enter. He turns his face toward the vast, dark canvas above the cliffs, noticing how the stars, which had seemed like scattered jewels before, now appear ordered and fixed in their celestial paths, mirroring the immutable laws that govern the cosmos. The Great Bear wheels slowly around the northern pole, a silent clock reminding him that disputes among mortals are but fleeting breaths in the immense expanse of eternity, offering a perspective that diminishes the sharpness of his earthly concerns. His sturdy donkey, tethered patiently at the cave mouth, lifts its head with a soft, knowing snort, sensing the profound change in its master, who now moves with a gait far less burdened than when they first arrived. The descent from the silent necropolis is slow, following the winding path that snakes down toward the fertile black earth nourished by the cyclical inundation of the great river. The sound of his sandals scraping the loose shale seems loud in the encompassing darkness, but soon this noise is replaced by the softer sounds rising from the plain, the rhythmic calling of insects and the distant, soothing murmur of the Nile's currents promising life and continuity. He begins to feel the pull of gravity and the pressing reality of the dawn approaching, yet the internal shield of stillness keeps the urgency of the world at bay, allowing him to observe the rising day rather than react fretfully to its demands. When he finally reaches the edge of the cultivated fields, the rich smell of damp soil and growing barley envelops him entirely, a potent aroma of life asserting its ceaseless cycle against the encroaching desert sand. It is here, standing between the barren rock and the living crop, that the true meaning of his father's counsel concerning the disputed field crystallizes. The stone boundaries define earthly possession, but the shared water of the Nile defines spiritual kinship and shared survival. He realizes that carving a hollow victory from this land would only poison the bounty for both families, while seeking sincere harmony ensures the blessing of Osiris upon all the harvest equally. He skirts the small outlying shanties of the village, careful not to disturb the sleeping inhabitants, moving with the quiet precision learned during his solitary vigil in the eternal darkness of the tomb. The sky is now softening to a pale, bruised violet along the eastern horizon, and the faint crowing of a rooster pierces the morning calm, marking the relentless approach of Ra's sunboat across the heavens and the beginning of the day's labor. His thoughts turn not toward the sharp legal arguments he had rehearsed for months in his bitterness, but toward the simple, enduring truths. The value of a good name and the enduring shame of bitter contention among those bound by ancestral blood. The man he must soon face is his cousin, a relation bound by the blood of the same grandfathers and the worship of the same household gods, yet estranged by the creeping greed that seems to bloom as easily as the grain in the fertile delta soil. Previously, the traveler had seen only malice and cunning calculation in his cousin's persistent actions, interpreting every motion as an act of calculated theft. Now he glimpses the profound fear of poverty and the desperation that must drive any man to fight so fiercely over a few spans of land crucial for sustenance. This fundamental shift in perspective, moving gently from harsh judgment to compassionate understanding, feels like the heaviest burden lifted from his shoulders, freeing him to act justly in accord with Ma'at rather than merely react defensively out of personal pride. This fundamental shift in perspective, moving gently from harsh judgment to compassionate understanding, feels like the heaviest burden lifted from his shoulders, freeing him to act justly in accord with Ma'at rather than merely react defensively out of personal pride. He finally arrives at the northern corner of the disputed tract, where the sun's first rays are just beginning to catch the dew-laden tips of the wheat stalks, setting the field aglow with morning fire. Lying half-buried in the moist soil are the two ancient boundary markers, crude, heavy stones placed by his ancestors during the reign of an ancient pharaoh whose name is now lost to the living memory of the villagers. These stones, which had been the physical focus of months of legal struggle and consuming anger, now appear almost insignificant, small, arbitrary tokens marking a temporary division in a living field stretching limitlessly beneath the rising light toward the horizon. Drawing cool water from the irrigation ditch, which flows impartially across both tracts of land, he pours it over his hands and face, washing away the fine desert dust and the residual weariness of the night's journey, symbolizing the cleansing of the internal conflict. He ties his linen garments neatly and straightens his posture, letting the inner resolution manifest as outward composure, an embodiment of the perfect balance achieved in the silence of the ancestral tomb. He knows that his cousin will arrive soon, driven by the urgency of the morning's work, expecting the traveler to be emotionally exhausted and aggressive after his long, sleepless vigil away from the comforts of home. He knows that his cousin will arrive soon, driven by the urgency of the morning's work, expecting the traveler to be emotionally exhausted and aggressive after his long, sleepless vigil away from the comforts of home. The field itself holds no malice toward either claimant. It simply offers its generous bounty to whoever tills it with diligence and respects the natural laws of water and sun administered by the river god Hapi. The traveler kneels briefly, running his hand over the damp, yielding earth, feeling the profound vibration of life teeming beneath the surface. reminding him that the true treasure is not exclusive ownership, but the sustenance yielded by shared labor and enduring peace. He resolves that his first words to his cousin will not be accusations or demands to honor the stone boundaries alone, but a simple, humble recognition of their shared ancestry and their mutual, profound dependence upon the eternal benevolence of this life-giving land. He stands patiently, waiting for the familiar silhouette to appear on the horizon path, feeling not the nervous tension of impending battle, but the quiet strength of one who has truly understood the weight of the past and the necessity of forging a peaceful future. The sun has now crested the horizon, casting long, stark shadows across the field, bathing the contested land in an impartial golden light that reveals every stalk of grain and every dewdrop with unwavering clarity. This light brings with it the clarity of the Duat, illuminating not just the boundaries carved by men, but the vast, undivided expanse of the life they are both granted to share under the watchful eye of the gods. Presently, a figure emerges, not with the quick, defiant stride of an enemy, but with the weary, slumped posture of a man who has already fought many silent battles with himself and the relentless earth. He carries a hoe slung over one shoulder, its wooden handle polished smooth by years of labor, and his gaze is fixed downward, seemingly unaware that the watcher stands before him, waiting patiently for the inevitable confrontation. The traveler observes the deep lines etched around his cousin's eyes, realizing that the boundary stone was perhaps less a symbol of greed and more a desperate attempt to secure the meager future for his own children against the terrifying caprices of the yearly flood and the ever-present threat of famine. When their eyes finally meet, the air is thick with the unspoken history of their fathers and the memory of the shared roof under which they were raised, two saplings growing from the same ancient root. The traveler lifts his hand, not in challenge, but in the silent, solemn gesture of shared recognition, and his voice, when it comes, is low and gravelly, speaking only of the morning dew and the promise of a successful harvest, avoiding any immediate mention of the disputed boundary. His cousin pauses, lowering his tool, and the tension around his mouth visibly softens, acknowledging that this meeting would not proceed along the expected path of angry recrimination and shouting matches beneath the scorching morning sun. He nods slowly, a single weary affirmation that suggests he too longs for the cessation of the Cold War that had divided their houses for the duration of the planting season. "Come," the traveler finally says, turning toward the bank of the great river. "Let us measure the problem not by the narrow width of a single furrow, but by the boundless scope of Hapi's generosity, who gives water freely to us both, regardless of where our fathers chose to place their stones." They walk side by side toward the muddy edge where the great, calm current flows eternally northward, the sound of the water washing away the residual bitterness that still clung to the air near the boundary line. The vastness of the Nile stretches before them, a serpentine deity that dictates the fate of all Egypt, placing the trivial argument over a few measures of earth into its proper, microscopic perspective against the backdrop of eternity and the endless cycle of inundation and recession. The cousin finally breaks the silence, his voice rough with emotion, confessing that the poor yield of the previous year had driven him to desperation, fearing he could not feed the youngest of his brood, and thus justifying the slow encroachment onto the traveler's ancestral holding. He speaks of the relentless pressure of taxes owed to the distant scribes of the pharaoh, and the fear that a single bad season could utterly destroy his family's lineage, scattering their seed like chaff on the wind. The traveler listens patiently, recognizing that fear often wears the mask of greed, and he understands that true peace is not achieved through victory, but through mutual security and the establishment of a system where both families can thrive without the gnawing anxiety of scarcity. "The land demands respect, not ownership," the traveler replies, kneeling to scoop a handful of the river's cool, brown water, allowing the mud to slowly sift through his fingers back into the stream. He proposes that instead of drawing a sharper line between them, they should redraw the water channels to share the vital resource more equitably during the critical months when the river recedes and the sun scorches the baked clay. He suggests they might also share the burden of maintaining the dikes and sluice gates, tasks too heavy for one man alone, thus transforming their rivalry into a cooperative effort that would yield greater harvests for both their households. This return to the ancient ways of shared responsibility, the pooling of muscle and wisdom, would honor their forefathers far more than any stubborn adherence to an aging boundary marker that the river itself would inevitably swallow in the next great flood. A slow, genuine smile finally spreads across the cousin's tired face, erasing the years of worry and distrust that had hardened his features. For he recognized the profound generosity and wisdom of this proposal, which offered security rather than mere temporary respite. They turned back toward the fields now, the contested ground no longer appearing as a dividing line, but as a vast, unified expanse awaiting their combined efforts and shared dedication to the principles of Ma'at. They seal this new pact not with the heavy, brittle words of a contract written upon papyrus, but with the simple, strong clasp of two hands hardened by honest toil, a silent vow made beneath the vast, impartial blue canopy of the newly ascended sun god, Ra. Without further discussion, they retrieve their tools and immediately begin walking the perimeter of the fields together, tracing the path for the new feeder channel that would draw water efficiently from the main river conduit and distribute it fairly across both segments of the land. The rhythm of their steps falls into an easy sync, a comforting cadence of cooperation that feels instantly more natural than the strained avoidance that had defined their relationship throughout the preceding seasons. The traveler finds a profound satisfaction in observing his cousin's skilled eye for topography and gradient, realizing that the knowledge he had sought to defeat was now being offered freely as a powerful asset to their shared enterprise. The work itself becomes a form of worship, a quiet, physical prayer offered to the gods of the earth and the river, cementing their bond in muscle memory and shared exhaustion. They discuss the precise angle needed for the sluice gate opening, calculating the necessary flow rate to ensure the furthest furrows of both territories receive adequate moisture without wasteful overflow, engaging in a complex mathematical negotiation that required mutual trust and shared objectives. The traveler notes the meticulous care his cousin applies to every measurement, understanding that the precision required for hydraulic engineering far outweighs the crude simplicity of merely defending an arbitrary stone marker. For hours, they speak only the language of earth and water, their philosophical resolution translating immediately into tangible, painstaking action that honors the principles of balance and efficiency demanded by the fertile black soil. The sun rises steadily higher, the heat becoming intense, yet neither man pauses, fueled by the rediscovered joy of working alongside one who shares both their blood and their intimate understanding of the land's peculiar needs. As the sun climbs higher, heating the damp earth and pulling the heavy, sweet scent of the ripening grain into the air, the two men decide to pause their labor and walk back toward the clustering of their family dwellings, for the agreement needed to be celebrated and ratified not only by their own hearts, but by the shared consumption of sustenance. The traveler insists they make an offering together at the small, rough-hewn shrine dedicated to the ancestors that stands at the village edge, pouring a libation of clear water onto the ground as a symbol of their renewed, clean intention. This act ensures that their fathers and grandfathers, those silent witnesses to all past disputes, would also observe and bless the peace achieved this morning under the benevolent gaze of Ra. The cousin retrieves a small clay jar of grain wine that he had stored beneath the shade of a sycamore tree before dawn, and they share a deep draught in silence, acknowledging the transition from solitary worry to shared prosperity. This simple, shared drink acts as a potent covenant, more binding than any formal document sealed by a distant vizier, establishing their brotherhood anew in the very presence of the earth they rely upon. They wash their hands of the dusty toil in the cool, clear water of an established irrigation ditch, preparing themselves to face their families and the community with the news of their amicable resolution, anticipating the relief their reconciliation would bring to all who depended upon the security of the harvest. The sight of the two cousins walking side by side, sharing a laugh over a small difficulty in marking the new ditch line, causes a subtle stir among the women already working at the grindstones and the children playing near the irrigation well. The prolonged tension that had hung over the small community, mirroring the division between these two powerful families, dissipates like morning mist touched by the sun, replaced by a quiet sense of communal relief and hopeful expectation. The traveler realizes that true peace is never just an arrangement between two individuals, but a necessary foundation for the entire settlement, allowing all hands to turn back toward productive work instead of the costly, draining business of maintaining vigilance and harboring resentment. He feels the weight of his long, anxious vigil finally lift from his shoulders, replaced by the lighter, enduring weight of shared responsibility and reconciled kinship. They enter the communal courtyard, where the morning tasks are in full swing, and the traveler sees his own wife pause her kneading, her face reflecting years of silent worry suddenly melting into profound, tearful joy at the sight of her husband and his cousin approaching together in harmony. He realizes the toll that this conflict had taken, not just on the men who argued over the earth, but on the women and children who carried the burden of silent anxiety within the walls of the home. The newfound peace extends far beyond the measurements of the field, restoring the vital flow of affection and cooperation within the very structure of their extended family. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The sight of the two men, arm in arm, drew the attention of the village elder, who sat upon a low stool supervising the distribution of grain, and he rose slowly, his staff tapping a silent rhythm on the packed earth as he approached the newly unified pair. His face, etched with the wisdom of 90 harvests, bore no immediate smile, but a solemn nod that acknowledged the true cost of their foolish separation and the heavy price paid by their ancestors for this restoration of harmony. He spoke quietly of the river's unchanging gift and the fleeting nature of man's tenure on the fertile black earth, reminding them that the land belonged to the gods, and their stewardship must be marked by shared toil, not jealous division. The elder's blessing was not merely a forgiveness, but a profound charge, to never again allow the shadow of small grievance to darken the whole village, for the strength of the rope lies only in the tightness of its interwoven strands. To seal the truce, the elder called for a symbolic act that surpassed the spoken oath, directing the men to proceed immediately to the central storage house where the family seeds for the coming season were kept, representing the future they must now forge together. There, the traveler's cousin brought forth his basket of choice emmer, and the traveler poured his own portion of grain into the same receptacle, mixing the kernels until it was impossible to discern which seed belonged to which man, making them henceforth inseparable in their future growth and yield. This blending was witnessed by the whole courtyard, binding the women and children to the promise, ensuring that the next planting would be a unified effort, dependent entirely upon their mutual trust and coordinated labor under the watchful gaze of the ever-benevolent sky. The shared action reaffirmed the ancient truth that what benefits the collective also ensures the prosperity of the individual, proving that true wealth is harvested not from isolated fields, but from cooperative hands working toward a common goal. The shared action reaffirmed the ancient truth that what benefits the collective also ensures the prosperity of the individual, proving that true wealth is harvested not from isolated fields, but from cooperative hands working toward a common goal. The rest of the morning was given over to quiet, shared labor, the men mending nets together near the river's edge, and the women pooling their flour and water to prepare a massive loaf for the midday gathering, ensuring that the very food they broke together tasted of unity. The traveler observed how smoothly the tasks proceeded when the emotional friction was removed, noting the swiftness with which the children, once cautious and silent, now played chase across the dusty ground, their laughter ringing freely and without the nervous undercurrent that had plagued the settlement for months. This profound shift proved that conflict, like a low fever, does not merely impede grand endeavors, but poisons the very smallest moments of daily life, stealing the inherent sweetness from every shared moment and necessary task. He felt a deep, abiding satisfaction that the wounds were not merely covered, but truly healed by the balm of genuine effort and honest apology. Later that day, as the sun climbed high and they paused for cool water beneath the awning of woven reeds, the traveler found himself looking out over the fields that had caused so much suffering, and he finally understood the profound irony of their struggle. The great Nile itself was the ultimate boundary marker, the source of all life and all measure, yet men still fought bitterly over a few cubits of mud at its edge, forgetting that the essential water flowed freely and ceaselessly to all who drew from its depths with a grateful heart and an open vessel. He realized that the fight was never truly about the size of the plot, but about the size of the heart that claimed ownership, and that the illusion of scarcity had blinded them to the reality of the God-given abundance spread across the entire length of Kemet, demanding only diligence and coordination. This new perspective brought not only relief, but a deep sense of shame for the time wasted, acknowledging that bitterness had drained more vitality from their lives than any drought ever could. As the hours softened and the harsh light of midday yielded to the gentle, purple twilight, a quiet peace descended upon the small settlement, a peace so profound it felt like a physical blanket of safety drawn over their weary shoulders. Tonight, the sounds were different. The usual anxious silence of the guarded village was replaced by the low hum of shared stories and the soothing repetition of a lullaby sung without reservation by a mother whose worries had finally dissolved like salt in water. The traveler watched the stars emerge, those faithful, shimmering companions, and felt his breathing deepen into a slow, steady rhythm, recognizing that this was the first night in many weeks he would seek slumber without the heavy, protective bronze dagger laid within easy reach of his hand. He understood that true security did not rest in weapons or vigilance, but in the unbreakable covenant made between kinsmen under the indifferent, eternal gaze of the heavens, where all things are measured by Ma'at. The shared evening meal was simple. Barley cakes and fish caught fresh that afternoon, but it was rich in unburdened conversation, laced with humor and shared memories that had been suppressed by years of quiet rivalry. The elder took up his lyre and played ancient songs of the flooding of the Nile and the mighty deeds of pharaohs long past, reminding everyone gathered that their small squabble was less than a single grain of sand in the long procession of eternal time. The women, who had borne the brunt of the tension, sat closer together than they had in years, trading advice on grinding techniques and weaving patterns, their shared history reasserting itself like water seeking its own level. The traveler felt his own heart expand, realizing that this restoration was the greatest service he could have offered his extended lineage, far exceeding any material offering or grand success he might achieve in his professional wanderings. Before the dawn broke, casting its first golden spears across the eastern desert, the traveler prepared his few belongings. Feeling a quiet gratitude for the unexpected gift of true peace he had found not in the seeking of new lands, but in the repairing of old, essential ties. His cousin approached him with a small, finely carved amulet of the goddess Ma'at, the Lady of Truth and Order, explaining that it was not a charm to bring luck, but a tangible reminder to carry balance and integrity in his heart wherever his sandals might tread. The traveler embraced him tightly, promising that the memory of their reconciliation would serve as a constant compass point, guiding him back toward righteousness whenever his path might become twisted by pride or greed in the long road ahead, ensuring that his own soul remained as straight and true as the river's course. His wife, eyes still damp with residual joy, packed his travel sack with fresh dates and sun-dried figs, insisting that he take an extra flask of the village's sweetest, clearest water, a final, poignant gesture that symbolized the renewed, flowing connection between them and their people. She spoke no words of complaint or fear concerning his continuing journey, but only words of deep love, knowing that the man who now left her side was burdened not by personal feud, but only by the honorable necessity of his trade. With a final draft of cool water from the irrigation canal, the traveler turned his back on the now harmonious village, stepping once more onto the ancient, dust-covered track that ran parallel to the majestic river, his personal mission complete and his spirit lighter than it had been since he first embarked upon this long and necessary journey into the heart of Kemet.